We're going to head over to the far side, which is what we call Modbotics, and that's where we make all the components that we ultimately assemble into the modules. So just yell out with any questions as we cruise around.
Installation that we can actually do by now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Still the yellow fluffy thing.
And more importantly, the blue stuff on the outside of the building is called Proclimer, and that actually air seals the house, so we get very close to a passive house principle just on our standard modules.
Yeah. That was actually interesting. I think also on the website as well. The 80% reduction of waste.
Yes.
50%.
Yeah, which is
I think actually that is
which is huge.
Yeah, because we are obviously on the glide path to net zero as well.
Yeah.
And are supporting that.
Well,
that is really, really
we measure it. So a conventional building site has 30 to 40% waste. Yeah. We currently track at 9.2%. And with more and more timber work, we're trying to get that down below 5%.
I mean, I don't see any concrete
being built in the streets. Yeah. You see the big skips.
Exactly.
Everything's designed digitally to fit, so they can nest
yes.
their products and materials to make optimisation of all of them. That's why only 9% waste.
Yeah, I absolutely. It makes complete sense. Yeah. Also, like cables, etc. Like obviously they're cut. Yeah.
Yes.
I follow on your website as well.
Yep. So the Modbotics robot line effectively is processing components that we're using to manufacture and assemble a building. And it starts with a framing machine where we process about 1,000 pieces of timber per day, or one every 52 seconds, for a full day's usage. The walls are then framed to millimetre perfection, and they come into the robot cell. Within the robot cell, there's 3 robots that work in unison. The first one does nothing but places the sheet perfectly on the wall. It picks it up off each of the material trays, for which we generally have 2, so that when we run out of material, the robots don't have to stop. And then the other 2 robots staple, screw, cut out any power points, windows, trim up the wall, remove the waste, and then we will apply a second or third layer depending on what we're trying to create. It's identical to how you build conventionally the end product, but it is with absolute precision and huge scale. So a typical 3-bedroom small house has about 160 linear metres of wall. We manufacture that in about 3 hours, and those walls are then assembled into a module in another hour. So we go from 0 to lock up on a small 3-bedroom house in about half a day, and this facility has the capacity to do about 2,000 to 3,000 houses a year, depending on their complexity.
Yeah. So, Jan, can I ask you, what level of customisation do you offer clients?
So with the walls, we can change the materials that go on the outside, the insulation that goes on the inside, the height, the length, and the openings that go within the wall. So they're completely customisable, but we do practice what's called design for manufacture and assembly, where if we can manipulate the design on a building to optimise the way we're manufacturing, we get really, really extreme benefits, both in terms of cost, sustainability, and also speed.
And what, if you like, star rating do you build the panels to? Is it near passive house?
We have a passive house wall, and then our standard wall is called a Modscape thermal wall, which we're using on our standard product. It has an R4 lining in it, and it's wrapped with Proclimer, so it creates an airtight structure. Interesting things that we've found with the services, and this was unexpected. On this particular project that's going through, it's 490 social and affordable apartments that's going to Cairns, and we have 2 electricians roughing in the wall on a table. So we pre-make all the electrical and data lines to length, and then they install them on the table. And if you're building it conventionally, you might have a team of 12 or 15 electricians roughing in a project. What we're finding here is we're hitting some huge efficiencies where we have 2 electricians roughing in 490 apartments, which is unbelievable.
And they do it
quality, right?
Yeah.
And they're also doing it in natural height rather than like bending
correct
down.
Correct. Much safer environment. Every panel's photographed. It makes it really efficient for the training. So we're training people to be familiar with the line and understand the way that we're assembling a building rather than building it with a hammer and nail. But if you take it to the electrician example, you could have an unskilled or non-qualified electrician working beside an electrician doing the manual component. I'll give you a quick rundown on. Yeah, jump in. I'm Jan, by the way.
Oh, Rob.
Yeah. Right. Beautiful. Jump in here, guys. If you just jump through to the lounge room, I'll give you a quick rundown on what this is.
Yeah.
So one of the projects running through the facility at the moment is a project that's going to Cairns. It's 1,008 modules, 490 apartments that are a combination of social and affordable accommodation. It's aimed at the over 55 market, and effectively what they're trying to do is bring singles or couples out of houses into 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that are better suited to their living requirements and free up some of the housing in the local community. So this is effectively the first modules that were built, or the first apartment that was built for the project. This is 2 modules that connect side by side. Once it's installed on site, the connection happens around the doorways. Otherwise, the kitchen, the flooring, the bathroom and everything in here is 100% completed and defected before it leaves the factory. Here we're using a floor cassette, wall cassette, roof cassettes and a sink bathroom pod, which is already finished before we install it. So interestingly, this will be, whilst it was the first apartment built, it's the last apartment that we install on site. So it sits here and it acts as a benchmark for quality and finish and colour, and to eliminate any design details. Zero threshold onto the balcony, ceiling fans, everything is included within the apartment. These are being built on a 4-week cycle, so start to finish 4 weeks. Every day for the next 70 weeks we have 3 popping out of the factory every day. It's a very good question and it's very comparable. If you buy a tap, the cost of the tap is the same on site versus the module. On a typical project, if you crudely split it down into sort of a third materials, a third labour, a third prelim profit insurance, the materials are identical.
Yeah.
But what happens is we get a buying gain because we're buying the same thing on scale that's going to be used repeatedly. The labour is the place we're focusing on. So on the robotic line, you know, when we put the timber in at the start, processed, to coming out the other end with bracing board and plaster on, that's costing us $1.50 a square metre in labour, where it was costing previously sort of $35 a square metre. So it's those systems and efficiencies that are being used to drive the price. We then have a slightly higher logistics cost to get it to site, so it then starts to bring it back up to level. But if it's designed properly, using proper DFMA principles, I believe on a one-to-one, like-for-like, it's about 5% more efficient. But what we find when we get over about 100 multiples of the same thing, we get another discount that comes from the buying gains and the efficiency we can get into the material capital costs and all that. But so if you're building a house in Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane, conventionally, you effectively have to move out of that house for 12 to 18 months if you're lucky. So you're paying rent while you're building, and you're also paying the CBA interest on those funds while you're building. Where with the off-site scenario, we might only be displacing you off your site for 2 to 3 months, and the lending period is a lot less. So if you factor in those sort of economies, yes, it becomes wildly more cost effective. Yeah, I think one of the huge benefits, and if we go back to the electrician's example, they're working at natural grade, everything's being done on the ground. But we probably find that it's the familiar environment and the processes that we're taking people to. We don't have live edges on a building site, we don't have unfamiliar spaces to operate. The vertical access is almost completely eliminated by the way that we're manufacturing. We've only had 1 lost time injury in the last 2 years. Which is a remarkable. And I guess a lot of what we do at Modscape, we base on what we see happening overseas, particularly in Scandinavia. And interestingly, in the factory, often you'll get a carpenter coming to the factory going, I'm not going to work in a factory. But then they realise, well, I'm in a climate-controlled environment, I've got beautiful lunchrooms, I've got lovely amenities. And that's why we're probably able to push the barrier on diversity within the workforce on the floor, because it's not confrontational and it is a safe environment.